Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the smell of fresh bread, warm, yeasty, coming from somewhere nearby. Your brain just did something involuntary, something automatic, something so deeply wired into your neurology that you had absolutely no control over it. Your mouth watered. Your attention shifted. Your body responded to a smell that exists nowhere near you, as if the food itself were real and present. That response is not random. That response is the result of 12,000 years of human history, 12,000 years of survival, civilization, war, religion, politics, and power, all compressed into a single sensory trigger so deep it bypasses conscious thought entirely. Bread did that. A mixture of ground grain, water, and time, so simple a child can make it, so powerful it built empires, is encoded into your nervous system at a level that most modern humans have never stopped to examine. This is the story of how that happened, and it is considerably stranger than you think. Here is the question that opens everything else. How does a food, one of the simplest combinations of ingredients in the entire human culinary repertoire, become the foundation of civilization itself? Not a metaphor, not an exaggeration. The literal, structural, architectural foundation of organized human society. Bread built the pyramids. Bread financed the Roman legions. Bread triggered revolutions that toppled monarchies. Bread was used as currency, as medicine, as religious ritual, as political weapon. And right now, in 2026, the industrial bread sitting on your supermarket shelf contains ingredients and processes that the humans who built those pyramids would find completely unrecognizable. There are layers to this story, each one more surprising than the last. And by the time we reach the final one, you will never look at a loaf of bread the same way again. I spent months breaking down that exact story into something you can actually use to upgrade your own mindset. It's all inside my new ebook, The Evolution of Human's Journey. If you've ever wanted a clear, fascinating look at human history, psychology, and where we're headed next, this is for you. Here's the best part. It's completely free. I put this on a pay-what-you-want model. So if you want to snag it for $0, you can. If you want to support my work and drop $10, $100, or even $1,000, that's entirely up to you. You set the price that feels right for you. Just click the Gumroad link in the description below, name your price, and grab your copy right now. Bread was not invented. It was discovered by accident. And the accident happened before humans had settled down, before agriculture, before civilization in any recognizable form. The oldest evidence of bread predates farming by thousands of years. In 2018, archaeologists excavating a site called Shubaika 1 in northeastern Jordan discovered the charred remains of flatbreads baked approximately 14,400 years ago by hunter-gatherers, people who had not yet domesticated grain, people who were still moving seasonally through the landscape following food sources. They were grinding wild grains, einkorn wheat, oats, club rush tubers, mixing them with water, and baking the result on hot stones beside a fire. Not because they had designed a recipe, because grain plus water plus heat produces something that smells extraordinary, tastes satisfying, and provides a concentrated caloric payload that raw grain cannot match. The accident was stumbled into, and then repeated, and then refined, and then across thousands of years, transformed from an opportunistic discovery into the central organizing principle of human civilization. But here is the detail that most accounts of bread's origin leave out entirely. The discovery of bread and the discovery of alcohol happened simultaneously. The same wild grains, the same water, left slightly longer, slightly warmer, and the wild yeasts naturally present in the grain begin fermentation. Researchers have debated for decades which came first, bread or beer. The current evidence suggests the answer is neither. They arrived together, two products of the same accidental process, two forces that would shape human history in parallel, one feeding the body, one altering the mind, both emerging from the same moment of prehistoric curiosity. The pyramids of Giza are one of the most studied structures in human history. Researchers have examined the engineering, the mathematics, the astronomical alignments, the quarrying techniques, the logistics of moving stones weighing up to 80 tons across desert terrain. But for a long time, one of the most fundamental questions remained genuinely unanswered. How did you feed the workforce? The answer, when archaeologists found it, was surprisingly straightforward: bread and beer. Excavations of the workers' village adjacent to the Giza Plateau, conducted by Egyptologist Mark Lehner and his team over several decades, uncovered industrial-scale bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves per day, massive ceramic vats for beer production, storage facilities for grain on a scale that required significant organizational infrastructure to maintain. The workers who built the pyramids, who moved those stones, who carved those chambers, who created one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, were paid in significant part in bread and beer, not as a primitive substitute for real compensation. as the actual currency of the ancient Egyptian economy. Grain was the foundational unit of Egyptian wealth. The ability to store it, process it into bread, and distribute it at scale was the mechanism through which the Egyptian state exercised economic control over its population. The pyramids were not built by slaves driven by fear. They were built by workers motivated, in part, by reliable access to bread. The logistics of feeding that workforce, the grain cultivation, the storage, the milling, the baking, the distribution, required administrative systems of extraordinary sophistication. Systems that, in building the infrastructure to feed workers, simultaneously built the infrastructure of the Egyptian state itself. Bread did not just feed the pyramid builders. Bread made the pyramids possible. Ancient Egypt was not unique in recognizing the political power of bread. Across the ancient world, control of grain and bread production was understood to be control of the population itself. In ancient Mesopotamia, the earliest known written records are not literature, not law, not religious text. They are grain accounting ledgers, cuneiform tablets recording how much grain was received, stored, distributed, and owed. The bureaucracy of bread, the administrative machinery required to manage grain at civilizational scale, produced the first writing system in human history. Literacy, in its earliest form, was a technology developed to manage bread. The Roman Empire understood this with particular sophistication. The Roman policy of annona, the state-subsidized distribution of grain to the citizens of Rome, was not charity. It was political technology. The poet Juvenal, writing in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, described the formula with memorable precision. Bread and circuses, panem et circusens, keep the population fed and entertained, and political stability follows. The Roman state maintained this system across centuries, importing grain from Egypt, North Africa, and Sicily at enormous logistical cost, because the alternative was a hungry urban population with the organizational capacity to be genuinely dangerous. Every time the grain supply was disrupted, through drought, through military conflict, through administrative failure, the political consequences were immediate and severe. Bread riots were not peripheral events in Roman history. They were a recurring structural feature of a system built on the promise that the state would keep the population fed, control the bread, control the people. This formula did not disappear with Rome. It echoed through every major civilization that followed. On the 5th of October 1789, a crowd of several thousand women marched from Paris to the Palace of Versailles. They were not marching for abstract political principles. They were marching for bread. The harvest of 1788 had been catastrophic. A severe drought followed by a brutal winter had destroyed grain crops across France. By the spring and summer of 1789, bread prices in Paris had reached levels that placed the basic caloric requirement of survival beyond the reach of ordinary working people. A family spending 80 to 90% of its income on bread alone, with nothing left for rent, clothing, fuel, or any other necessity, is not a population thinking about political philosophy. It is a population on the edge of biological desperation. The women who marched to Versailles were not ideological revolutionaries. They were mothers and wives and workers who could not feed their families, and their march, their demand for bread from the king who had failed to provide it, was one of the pivotal moments of the French Revolution. The revolutionary government that emerged understood the lesson immediately. Control of bread became a central preoccupation of revolutionary France. The maximum, a price control on bread and other essential goods, was implemented in 1793 under threat of execution for violators. The guillotine and the bread ration were the twin instruments of revolutionary governance. Bread did not cause the French Revolution, but the absence of affordable bread removed the final restraint on a population that had accumulated decades of political grievance. Hunger converted philosophical discontent into physical action, and the action that followed changed the political map of the modern world. For most of human history, bread was made through a process that no one fully understood. Grain was ground, water was added, the mixture was left to rest. It rose, it was baked, it was eaten. The transformation of a dense paste into a light, airy, structured loaf was attributed to divine intervention, to magic, to the mysterious properties of certain vessels or locations. The actual mechanism was invisible. It was not until 1857 that Louis Pasteur, working in France on problems of fermentation, identified the microorganisms responsible: yeast, single-celled fungi, naturally present on grain surfaces and in the surrounding environment, consuming the sugars in flour and producing carbon dioxide gas as a byproduct. That gas, trapped within the elastic protein network of gluten that forms when wheat flour is mixed with water, creates the bubbles that expand during baking and set into the structure of a risen loaf. The entire architecture of bread, the crumb, the crust, the texture, the volume, is the physical record of a microbial process occurring invisibly within the dough. For 12,000 years, humans had been managing and optimizing a biological system they could not see and did not understand. They knew that certain starters produced better bread than others, that temperature mattered, that timing mattered. that the vessel used for fermentation affected the results. They had accumulated, through generations of practical experimentation, a sophisticated empirical knowledge of yeast behavior, without ever knowing that yeast existed. The bread that most people in the industrialized world eat today bears almost no resemblance to the bread that built civilization. The transformation happened in stages, beginning with the Industrial Revolution and accelerating dramatically through the 20th century. The introduction of steel roller milling in the 1870s changed everything. Previous milling technology, millstones, ground the entire wheat grain. The result was a flour that retained the bran and the germ, the nutritionally dense outer layers of the grain, along with the starchy endosperm. Roller milling separated these components with unprecedented efficiency, producing a white flour of extraordinary fineness and consistency, but stripped of the fiber, vitamins, and minerals concentrated in the bran and germ. The white bread that resulted kept longer, looked more refined, was associated with wealth and status in ways that darker whole grain bread was not. The population chose white bread enthusiastically, and paid for that choice in nutritional deficiencies so severe that governments eventually mandated the artificial addition of nutrients back into the flour that the milling process had removed. The 20th century added further layers of industrial intervention. The Chorleywood bread process, developed in England in 1961, reduced the fermentation time required to make a commercial loaf from hours to minutes through the addition of high-speed mechanical mixing, additional yeast, ascorbic acid, and a range of emulsifiers and additives. A loaf of bread that once required a day of patient fermentation could now be produced in under 3 hours at industrial scale. The result was cheaper, more consistent, more shelf-stable, and fundamentally different in texture, in flavor, in nutritional profile, in digestibility from any bread that had existed in the previous 12,000 years of human bread making. Bread is a mirror. Every civilization has made it differently, and those differences reveal something precise about the values, resources, technology, and social organization of the culture that produced it. The dense, sour rye breads of Northern Europe, built for long winters, scarce wheat, and the need for caloric density that would sustain physical labor in cold conditions. The flat breads of the Middle East and South Asia, adapted to climates, fuel sources, and cooking, technologies that made oven baking impractical at the household level. The refined white loaves of industrial modernity reflecting abundance, convenience, the prioritization of shelf life and visual appeal over nutritional completeness. The sourdough revival of the early 21st century representing a cultural counter-reaction to industrial food production, a desire for connection to craft, process, and the microbial complexity that industrial bread eliminated. Each bread is a document. Each loaf encodes the priorities of the people who made it, what they valued, what they had access to, what they feared losing, what they were trying to become. And the bread that any given civilization produces at any given moment is one of the most accurate reflections of that civilization's relationship with its own food supply, its own biology, and its own past. Bread does not just feed people. It tells you who they are. Here is the complete picture. 14,000 years ago, a hunter-gatherer ground wild grain, mixed it with water, placed it on a hot stone beside a fire, and produced something that smelled extraordinary. That accident repeated, refined, scaled, industrialized, politicized, weaponized, and commodified across the entire span of human civilization. Produced the pyramids of Giza, produced the first written language, produced the Roman Empire's political stability and its eventual crisis, produced the French Revolution, produced the modern industrial food system, and produced the loaf of bread sitting on your kitchen counter right now, descended in an unbroken line from that first accidental flatbread on a stone beside a prehistoric fire. The simplest food in the human diet is simultaneously the most historically consequential. It fed the workers who built the ancient world. It financed the armies that defended it. It triggered the revolutions that rebuilt it. And it encoded in the smell of baking that bypasses conscious thought and goes directly to something older and deeper in the human nervous system. 12,000 years of survival, civilization, and accumulated human experience. That is what bread is. Not a food, a document, the longest continuously updated record of what it has meant to be human. If this changed how you see something you encounter every single day, share it with someone who has never stopped to think about where their food actually came from. Because the most ordinary things, examined carefully, turn out to contain the most extraordinary histories. And if you want to keep going deeper into the hidden histories embedded in the objects and systems of everyday life, the next video is already waiting. I will see you in it.